Hi everyone, I am Golchin Jalalat and today I'm gonna present to you my final project, Network Infrastructure Risk Analysis and Defense in Depth Recommendation on the SPI and SPI IT Corporation. As you know, our corporation formed to protect customers' private data and business assets as well as defend cybercrimes. Our specialists perform footprinting, scanning, and reconnaissance different types of vulnerability, identifying the threats and assessing vulnerabilities after enumeration, and mitigating and finding solutions to reduce the risk of attacks. They are troubleshooting and fixing the breaches in the host networks and strengthen network security. Our key members are as follows: CEO, senior level management, and middle level management. Our company has 5 different departments as operations management, information technology, human resource, marketing, and finance departments. Our corporation is providing services to both public and private industries. But our 3 special customers are Manitoba Hydro, Bison Fire Protection Incorporation, and BCB Asset Management Incorporation. Here is a big picture overview of our network design that is a simulation in Packet Tracer to provide a more comprehensive view for you. And here you can see the logical design of each department that are connected to server room through a separate layer 2 switch. These are the services and tools that we use for footprinting, scanning, and reconnaissance of vulnerabilities in the customer's networks. A brief description of each item has been provided for more consideration. Linux Kali with different tools like Nmap and Metasploit is our priority to use for reconnaissance. Literally, reconnaissance tools are commonly used for threat identification and vulnerability assessment. Here you can see the services and tools we are using for identifying the threats and assessing vulnerability after enumeration. Nmap, Nikto, and Nessus are our priorities. These are 3 categories of security controls in a defense in depth that we use. Administrative controls like different security policies, technical or logical controls like different tools as IDS intrusion detection systems or IPS intrusion prevention systems, and physical control like different physical mechanism as face detection systems and security cameras. Also, we have different types of controls like deterrence, preventative, detective, compensating, corrective, recovery, and directive. Based on the case, our professional teams decide to use which category and which type of category. We have different types of assets in our asset inventory that you can see the essential physical asset including equipment, software assets, and data assets including information, human, and facilities in this slide. Here we focus on 10 key assets that we need to protect them, and later on we will discuss the risk analysis on them. These key assets are as follows: main database and financial information in the status of at rest, in transit, and in use. Next, DNS management software and the edge router as equipment. Staff as people type of asset and data center facility type. that is our most expensive asset. Based on the CIA triad, these assets are high or very high confidential, as well as integrity and availability are high or very high on them. These assets can be jeopardized by different threats that I prepared the most serious ones for each asset here with description. You can see the threat likelihood and exposure level relevant to each threat. Here you can find the risk assignment determination that obviously the most important factors for making decision to mitigate the risk are the asset value, threat likelihood, and threat exposure. Eventually, decisions are as follows. Mitigate the risk of main database at rest by the threat of storage media exposure, the likely possibility, and high threat exposure. Mitigate the risk of main database in transit by the threat of exploitation of vulnerable and misconfigured databases. The chance of threat is possible and high threat exposure. Mitigate the risk of main database in use by the threat of database injection attacks SQL. The chance of threat is possible and high threat exposure. Mitigate the risk of financial information at rest by the threat of embezzlement, although the threat chance is unlikely with a low exposure because it is so harmful to a company reputation and based on evaluations, decisions have been made to mitigate the risk. Mitigate the risk of financial information in transit by the threat of man-in-the-middle attack at threat likelihood as possible exposure is high. Mitigate the risk of financial information in use by the threat of backdoors attacks. This threat chances likely exposure is high. The last asset has been decided to mitigate is data center with the threat of access to network by unauthorized persons. The likelihood is possible and exposure is medium, but based on the most valuable asset, the decision is to mitigate. DNS management software with the threat of tampering and staff assets by threat of being attacked by phishing has decided to transfer. The decision has been made based on our priority and budget. Decision for the failure of communication links thread on the edge router is to accept the risk. The reason is damaging to infrastructure like a dead cable is inevitable, so fixing any problem could be more economical than any solution to mitigate it. All the assets that are considered here have high vulnerability severity. As you can see here in this slide, 3 vulnerability descriptions on main database are weak encryption, inadequate maintenance, and inadequate network management. Obviously, vulnerability description list shows that we need more protection on our assets. On risk analysis, we have exposure factor is expected overall asset value loss because of a realized risk. Very large for assets that are irreplaceable. You can see that we have 75% and 50% for main database in different statuses. On financial information risk analysis, we have exposure factor of 75% that can occur 4 times a year and would lead to $300,000 annual loss expectancy in the worst case. As far as I mentioned, exposure factor is usually high for the assets that are irreplaceable and small for assets that are easily replaceable, such as hardware. But based on high asset values of data center, we have a 40% exposure factor, and it can lead to $800,000 annual loss expectancy. Here you can see the risk analysis on DNS management and staff that we decided to transfer the risk. Bootloader is an asset that can be replaceable, but based on any failure, access to this router can lead to inaccessibility to data, so the exposure factor became high to 90%. Failure of communication links can be occurred with a simple dead cable, eventually due to asset value and ARO. We can see there is really low single loss expectancy and annual loss expectancy. Therefore, the decision is to accept the risk. To mitigate the risk of a storage media exposure on main database at rest, first of all, we need to deploy a network server data rack that is more secure on data center. Next, we need to install MySQL monitoring tools and Solar server monitoring on external and internal server, as well as CITO system in IT department. Also, we need to establish a new policy on auditing on our policy on SPY and SPY. And countermeasure cost of this mitigating is total $6,240. To mitigate the next risk on main database in transit, first of all, we need to remove all default account on external server and configure the new accounts and transfer the features. We need to patch the database constantly and monthly. And also, we need to monthly report should prepared by IT department staff under supervision of CTO and CSO. The countermeasure cost of this mitigation is $3,000. To mitigate the risk of database injection attacks on main database in use, we need to deploy PDO, PHP data objects, which is an abstraction layer for the database queries, and at least 2 staff training to be able to use this. Also, this control should apply by CITO on the server and database systems like access control lists. Also, we need to training program for 7 people in IT department. The countermeasures cost of this mitigation will be $5,000. Here, the 3-way recommendation for mitigate the risk of embezzlement with a countermeasure cost of $3,500. To mitigate the risk of man-in-the-middle attack, we need to set a virtual private network recommendation AnyConnect of Cisco, as well as setting encryption on access points and added some new policies with a countermeasure cost of $4,500. For mitigate the backdoor attacks risk, we need to deploy a firewall, also install network monitoring, and use anti-malware with a total countermeasure cost of $3,000. To mitigate the risk of unauthorized access to data center, our recommendation is recognition as face detection, 3 high-resolution cameras, and an automation program in Python with a countermeasures of $7,000 and $310. Our decision is to transfer the risk of tampering on DNS management software and being attacked by phishing on staff. and accept this risk. Thank you.